All right, today we are joined by none other than Dan Willis. I'm going to let him give himself an introduction, so let's hear what he has to say first before we jump into this.
I'm co-founder of WellGood. We empower and educate organizations and employees to look after and improve their mental health on an ongoing basis. And how we do that is we use technology, specifically AI, to be able to prevent the onset of mental health crisis in the workplace.
So, if this is your first time tuning in, then welcome. If it is not your first time tuning in, then welcome back. We are a series that aims to tackle some of the greatest questions that stem from artificial intelligence and related technologies. The way that we're doing this is getting on incredible minds to talk with me about what it is that they're doing in their respective fields and see if we can find some clarity in these very muddy waters, which is AI ethics, AI governance. Are there any best practices that we can take away? Are there any universal ethics or universal truths that we need to keep in mind as we move forward and as AI continues to become such an integral part of our lives? I will say that this is not the end. Don't worry. If you would like to continue the conversation, we have a Slack community that we've started. You can find links to the community below. And that's a place where if you enjoy this at all, if you like or are doing anything around AI ethics, AI governance, please come in there, share your voice. We'd love to hear you, hear what you're working on. And yeah, feel free to introduce yourself. There's a lot of smart people in there, a lot smarter than me, I will say. And so we've been having some incredible conversations. It's always nice when a community takes shape and you start to see that I or you are not the only one posting and you get some responses to the questions you have or the thoughts that you come up with. Last thing I will mention is that we have a sponsor for this series, EthicsGrade. They're absolutely incredible AI benchmarking firm. You can find information about them in the links below. But I will say, if it weren't for them, I would not be here. And we definitely would not have the quality or caliber of guests coming on the podcast. So let's get into it and talk with Dan Willis.
Are you a robot?
So, Dan, it is amazing to have you on here. I'm very excited to talk with you about mental health. It is something close to my heart. I don't think a lot of people know this, but I actually taught mindfulness for quite a bit when I was living in Spain and when I was around people. Now these days I'm living in the countryside. I don't really teach much mindfulness, but I still have my own practice and I still am a big advocate of the importance of mental health. And so maybe we can just start by hearing a bit about your story and what got you into this. Did you have some kind of crisis? Did you decide that this was important for what reason?
Definitely. So as with any, I suppose, as with any journey, there is always a start point. And for me, it did start with a crisis. So I was going through my own personal mental health crisis that meant that I needed to try and find help. And it was, a really tough time of my life, where I was having to try and understand, where that help could be found, who I speak to, and particularly as a man, it's one of those things that you struggle to come to terms with quite a lot. And through that journey, through actually being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I went through this whole entire journey of trying to understand what mental health actually is. I had no knowledge of it prior to my diagnoses. The only reference that I ever had was the likes of Fight Club or One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, all these Hollywood stereotypes of what mental health can be. And for me, for even a moment, I thought, wow, is that actually me? I've been diagnosed with a serious mental health disorder, and am I someone who should be locked up? Like Jack Nicholson, and it was far from it. The realism of it is completely far a different place. So what happened was, with my a lot of my background was actually in digital strategies and trying to understand problems and trying to find solutions for my clients. And I thought, well, let's do the same here for mental health. So I started looking, researching, doing a lot of ambassadorial sort of work for a UK charity called Mind. So they're the largest UK mental health charity. Volunteering and even running a marathon for them, which was quite an achievement. But throughout this journey, I was really trying to understand more about bipolar and how I could live more positively with my life. And not only for the benefit of me, but actually for my family as well, because that's the most important aspect for me. And throughout this journey, I started looking at platforms that were out there. And if I'm being completely frank and honest, a lot of them would help you at point of crisis. They would tell you that you're feeling unwell when you're unwell. Glorified mood diaries, as I call them. And for me, yes, having Matthew McConaughey or a celebrity reading you a bedtime story is great for your mindfulness. Or being asked on a regular basis, how do you feel? That's all well and good if you have that understanding and awareness already. But there wasn't anything out there that would prevent me from actually declining in the first place, or allow me to stay up. And so that's when the concept of Wellgood actually came to fruition. I met my co-founder, my business partner, Adam McNichol, whose background is managing and developing large agencies. So he was last in post at an international ad agency as their MD, and he was managing 4 or 5 time zones. And as anyone will know, being an MD of an organization is stressful at the best of times, but managing that many time zones, I don't know how he didn't sleep. And he came to a crisis point as well. And he subsequently had to leave that role. And so we had this vision of creating a preventative mental health platform. But we didn't know what to do. It was one of those we know the dream. We know we want to prevent mental health problems for everyone. But how do we go and execute that? And we very quickly came to the understanding that the business world is probably the best place to start. And it's very well documented of the struggles that people have within workplace stress, anxiety, depression. It has huge cost impacts on not only the individual's health, but actually performance. There's actually a financial attribute to, poor mental health in a business.
Yeah, completely.
It costs the UK economy about 45 billion a year, in from a poor mental health point of view. And we knew from that point that there was a viable business model that we could develop. And actually, by seeing all these different data points, we would then be able to develop an intuitive AI that could prevent that onset based on user behavior, as well as operational metrics as well.
So I want to dive into the product a bit more a little in a minute, but I will just say that it's so spot on. And I think now more than ever, when it comes to what we're living and how we're living, and so many people being isolated, especially if you don't have the ability to be around your family, or maybe sometimes, I'm laughing because my wife's right here, sometimes your family is the hardship that you go through, and it's not the easiest thing. You go from working in an office all the time, and then all of a sudden you're at home and you have to look at reality with your My wife's staring at me real good right now. So yeah. So that is such an important factor right now as we're living through this, and there is all this turmoil, and it is so much easier to be triggered. And I know that just in my own personal life, we have two close friends who are suffering from burnout because of work and how they were working and what they were going through, and then being thrown into the washing machine of 2020. And they said, okay, you know what, I'm going to take time off. And here's the point that I'm making, is that their company is paying for that when they're on sick leave, right? And so that's something that a company, I imagine, would want to try and avoid. And if they can avoid that, then it's going to be cheaper for them, which is sadly the factor that they are looking at. They're not probably not really caring about, oh, well, if my employee is actually well, but they're looking at the bottom line, I would imagine, at the end of the day. And so when you factor that in, but then one of our friends has stayed off of working for about a year. And so after X amount of time, I'm not sure exactly when. And so this is all Spain too. This is very Spanish centric. I know in the US it's totally different. And I don't think you can expect the government to step in the US and start giving you funds if you're taking sick leave for mental health. But in Spain, they do. If you're taking this, you have this burnout and you have mental health issues, then you're getting money from the government after your company stops paying. So that's another reason. It's like, okay, now you're costing, like you said, the government money, and you're not doing what you could be doing. You could be creating incredible things, right? You could be doing living your dream, as they say. And
Definitely.
so
Well, the cost is both ways, isn't it? You know, it's not only, are you sick, but someone else has to, do that work as well. And often then there is no replacement individual. It means everyone else has to take on, that level of work, and
leading to more burnout.
Exactly. Right? And as someone, if you are sick, you shouldn't feel that guilt at all, because you shouldn't be in that position in the first place, that you are sick. And so you shouldn't feel that guilt for the organization for getting you into that position. Obviously there are a whole multitude of factors that come into depression or stress or anxiety, and they are workplace related or personally related. You've got financial well-being as well, which is huge, especially you're looking at COVID and what's happening around that from an unemployment point of view. But there's so much that we need to be able to identify and look at to be able to understand what mental health actually is. And I don't think until COVID actually came along, COVID's been a wake-up call to a lot of these organizations. And I hate to say it, it's these organizations who have these open door policies. And I suspect you've probably seen a few of these businesses in the past, and it's like, my door is always open to my staff. It's like, well, it's not good enough, and it definitely isn't good enough now, because no one's got these doors, and everyone's going from one Zoom to another, or no one's feeling that they're open to actually speak to someone that you naturally would have had a water cooler moment for previously. You could say, oh, there's John, he's looking a bit disheveled, or he's been late to work a few times this week. Whereas now it's like, well, if I schedule it nicely, it means that I can have a Zoom at 10:30 in the morning. I don't have to get out of bed till 10 o'clock. So these examples, it shows that presenteeism is rife within organizations, and it is increasing.
Yeah, so there's some things that I wanted to touch on there, like Mainly this like idea of one sec, sorry, let me try and collect my thoughts because this is hard to articulate, but should it be, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, should it be these companies that are responsible for this, or is this every person's responsibility? I feel like it should be the person's, right?
So in the UK, we've got legislation called the Equality Act of 2010. Within that, it stipulates that workplace cannot discriminate on for disability, and that they have to support those who come forward with disability. Okay, so these are called reasonable adjustments. So it's lawful. It's actual law that an organization has to support their employees through those dark times. Okay. However, it is of our opinion, and actually of the wider community around mental health, that it is the employee, so it's the individual's responsibility to maintain their mental health and to, live positively. However, in the event of poor mental health, or in the event of them coming forward with a mental health problem, it is then the employer's responsibility to try and support them through that, so that they can get back to work effectively and productively.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. Now, let's jump into the technical side of this a little bit, and how you're using data and how you're using AI and machine learning in your own product. And really, I think the interesting thing that we were talking about before we hit record was the ethical side of this and the great power that you have when you're looking at this data from people, and how you can ensure the trust, and how you can ensure that you're not going to be doing shady things with their data behind the scenes.
No, it's that, it's like Spider-Man always says, with great power comes great responsibility, isn't it? And trust is incredibly important to us. We know that the data that we collect and the data that we used for good can also be used in exactly the opposite manner. And we've seen that, on a global scale, through politics, and we've seen it on a global scale through advertising behavior. And so we know that already we are fighting a battle around trust and technology. And not only that, is we've also got that interlinked trust between an employee and the business as well. Because not all countries have the same protection for staff as the UK. We know within the States, it's not, the laws over in the States are completely different around employee welfare than it is to the UK. And so for us to be able to protect those participants or the employees, we need to make sure that we're upfront about how their data is used, and their rights of actually communicating with us directly, because that's the most important thing, and that's how we gain that trust very quickly.
And so I think we should probably take a step back, because I got a little excited and was running before I could walk. And so I think we might want to just break down what exactly Wellgood does and how it does it.
So what we do is we look to communicate with employees on an infrequent basis. And with that data, we look to report back to organizations in an anonymous fashion, holistically, on the mental health of the organization, the actual health organization. Do based on trends of that particular business, around sickness, around alignment of culture, and and around sort of mental health awareness and diversity and so many different areas that we focus on, we can actually start building a predictive and preventative model that will support better mental health within the organization.
And so when you say you communicate with the employee infrequently, is that where the machine learning comes in, or is there an actual human calling someone?
No human at all. So everything we do has been built to scale. So there's a lot of platforms out there at the moment that, they are great for what they do, but they provide a lot of human interaction. So, the opportunity to speak to a therapist, or the opportunity to speak to someone, to be able to take you through that journey. With us, it is fully automated, and we signpost the employee at the right time to be able to prevent that onset of crisis. So a prime example, if we start seeing an increase in anxiety within an individual, then what we would look to do is look to signpost them at the right times to be able to prevent them from actually having real anxiety within the workplace, so that they don't get sick and it doesn't contribute to poor performance.
And are you expecting the employee to tell you they're having anxiety?
Not at
Or,
all, no.
okay, so how does that work?
So there is no single point of data that means that we can identify someone's mental health. You can't say, if you were to talk to myself and say that you're depressed, then that does not diagnose you. And, we're stating right now that we are not a diagnostic tool. So we will not tell someone that they are depressed or that they have anxiety. And the reason for that, firstly, is because it can be triggering for that individual. So it can actually spiral them into more of a depression per se.
That makes sense.
But what we look to do is we look to engage with them over several key pillars, understanding, say, for example, awareness of mental health. We look at their awareness of their own mental health. We look at cultural alignment with the organization. We look at sickness patterns within the organization, and looking at all of these different data points, it allows us to be able to put together a lovely picture of how the health of that individual actually is, and how they can behave in future.
So one thing that I noticed from all of the different apps that I've tried, and I've done more, like I mentioned before, I was big into the meditation, right? And so I've done things like Headspace and Calm and another one, Insight Timer. And then I also had one that I can't remember the name of now, but it was like asking you probably know this better than I do. It's asking you how you're feeling, what you did today, or what you would rate your day as, that kind of thing. And you have to have a lot of dedication to do those. Like, I find it, at least this is me personally, I find it much easier to just go and meditate rather than go through and look at the different the app and fill in my information and then tell about how my meditation was or what I was feeling when I was meditating. And so how are you expecting people to take the time and actually be consistent with this or do this and prioritize it, really? Because it's a question of priorities, I imagine.
No, completely. We are busy individuals, aren't we? And there's a reason why, and you've just said it, there's a reason why you've used so many apps. It's because you become fatigued with each one, because of the amount of data that they require from you on a daily basis. I've used them in the past, and you get notifications at set times every day, going, hey there, would you like to check in? And realistically, at that set time every day, I'm probably feeling exactly the same. It's very rare that I will probably go away from that behavior, because it's usually say 6 o'clock in the evening before I've got to put the kids away. It's just after dinner and I haven't got time for this today. And so the way that we are gathering data is is actually more infrequent. We're not doing it on a daily basis, and we are doing it in ways that it's not just reliant on their input. So we can be quite reactive to a lot of passive behaviors that that individual or that business actually has as well.
So does that mean that you're privy to more data than just what they're giving you? And so then you're looking at the business has to give you a lot of confidential data. How does that work?
So we do look at, say, sickness records for the business. That's more based on an anonymous point of view. So we don't look at individuals around that. We can identify trends of sickness within an organization on a historical point of view, and that allows us to be able to identify preventative times of the year that there would be a natural spike in sickness.
Do you also, sorry to interrupt, but this just came to mind. Do you also identify maybe some managers that are pressing too hard on their employees and they are causing a lot of mental sickness?
So we don't report anything back that is identifiable to a particular employee. But what we are able to do is we are able to understand if there is an issue around management, for example, if there's an issue around diversity, if there's an issue around even employee benefits. If people aren't given the opportunity to grow within an organization, they're not provided enough training, as an example. So all these different things we can identify, and what we do to the business, which is the most important aspect, and it's the most impactful thing that we do within the work, is we report on a regular basis to the business, and we give them addressable insights for them to be able to put in place. So a prime example that I always refer to is if we're seeing a rise in anxiety within the organization, then we can provide them with addressable insights on how to avoid that crisis within the business. So they can actually action that themselves as a business. And what we do is we then encourage accountability by reporting any actions and any programs that are in place directly to employees as well. So we can say to employees, your business has made these actions and addressed this, which has meant that there's been a return, there's a success story there. And what that does is it then starts reducing stigma amongst an organization as well. And that's a real key area of preventing onset of crisis. Is actually if people are open and transparent about themselves, then actually you're living in a much better culture.
Yeah, the importance of that is huge. And I mean, you see it just and the way that culture has shifted for us from even, I would say even, 10 years ago, you couldn't take a mental health day off.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That was non-existent. And now we have those times where we can just say, hey, I need a day for myself. I'm going to take this one off. And depending on where you work, I know there's still companies that aren't for that or they don't believe in that, but most companies do understand the importance of that. And so it's very interesting to look at the culture and see that. Now, you may have said this before, but can you just reiterate, is there something going on in for you to get all of these data points on me and on my phone and on my computer and all of that, are you running in the background so that you can catch things that maybe wouldn't necessarily be seen? Or is it only if I interact with the specific app that I get to give you data?
So future-wise, what we would love to be is we would love to have no interaction whatsoever with an individual, that we would only speak to them in the event of any form of intervention. However, we're miles away from that. And we do not believe at this stage, especially within a business, that we would monitor an individual. So we don't look at, for example, we know there are platforms out there from a mental health and a well-being point of view for businesses that monitor emails. They look at frequency, they look at regularity, they look at tone of emails that are going out there. We don't think that's morally acceptable to be able to monitor an individual's email, for example. So the data that we take from individual employee is all that we take from them is actually the information that they communicate directly to us. And then we take objective, factual information from the organization as well.
Mm-hmm. So it's like this compare and contrast from what they're doing and then the bigger picture and what the organization has. I mean, it's funny you say that because I've talked quite at length with others around this subject of like the company spying, and in our Slack channel also we just put up something about Amazon having their webcams will tell Amazon if their employees are working. So it's like really showing you that and from a mental health standpoint, that is just, that's ridiculous to me, that the kind of pressure that would put on someone. But I've talked to one person that comes up is Lewis Bird, and his application is very much, it's got some similarities, but it's very much for like suggesting basically keeping health in the whole organization and making sure that people get the recognition they deserve and get these things that are deserving of them. And his response to that, when I told him, oh, well, how are you going to do that? And they're going to monitor Slack, they're going to monitor emails, they're going to monitor all of this information. And he was saying, well, if you think that the company doesn't already monitor that, then you're very naive, right? So the companies are already doing it. So why not just leverage that?
But that goes back to just, you can look all over history and talk about, well, if someone's doing something bad, then actually if I do that too, then is that a bad thing? The ethical question is always there. You know, for any research or any work to be ethical, you know, prime example is that we need informed consent. And, you know, we are, you know, if someone doesn't want to speak to us, then we don't speak to them. It's as simple as that. But the way that we do communicate with employees, we onboard significantly more participants or employees than a lot of those who use smoke and mirror tactics, because we're so open and ethical in the way that we approach this. We have that trust from day one, and it means that we get the quality of data is a lot higher than if not.
Yeah. Well, and I see this vision of you not wanting to interact with the employee. You just are kind of there and you know what's going on. You have this pulse check on the company, but unless there is a danger, you're not going to step in anywhere. And I also see the reality of like, wow, that is you're walking a very fine line, right? So the importance of being open, like you said, and making sure that everyone knows exactly what is happening with their data and exactly what's happening with Wellgood and how you convey that. Because I just think about the terms and conditions that you always have to read and sign, and nobody reads those. Or maybe the lawyer that's listening does actually read them, but you don't have a choice, right? Like you either sign them and you use the app and you get the benefits, or you don't, and then you just say, all right, cool, well, I'm going to try and find an alternative. So where and how do you be so transparent? How do you go about telling people that?
So we're not afraid to talk about how we're trying to drive change within business. we're trying to create cultures that empower, as I said at the beginning, that empower and educate organizations and employees to live better lives. And the way that we're transparent is that we have a full onboarding suite that sort of acts in a marketing communication plan, basically, that we onboard well-good champions within an organization, and we empower them to be able to communicate openly with staff, with leadership. We also, in the way that we onboard staff throughout the program, we have a multitude of different ways that we do that as well. And we give choice as well to employees, which is, it may sound really small and insignificant, but it is a hugely powerful feature that we have, in the way that an employee can choose to communicate with us on Slack, for example, or they could choose to communicate with us on a completely different platform. We go to where the communities are, we go to where the trust is. And if they don't trust that, to communicate with us on Slack is best for them because they're worried that their employer is monitoring their Slack, then they can communicate with us on a completely different platform.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And that seems like the way to do it, right? Because that was another one of my main concerns when you were first breaking this down, is that how am I, as an employee, going to buy into this when I know you're working with my boss?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what am I going to think, or what is my boss going to think if I just start, like, if I start divulging all of this, or if things are recommended about me that aren't necessarily good. But it seems like, from what I understand, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you're not recommending things unless there is a significant danger of a spiral, and you're also not doing it. It's all very anonymous.
Exactly.
So the boss is never going to know that, oh, you Wellgood recommended that his employee takes some mental health days or does some of this.
Exactly that. So at no point is any form of data traceable back to an employer. In fact, to a degree, we don't know who we're speaking to as well. So we do have an SOS function within the platform that if we were to see crisis coming up, or if a employee was to request help through us, then we would be able to identify them as us. But at no point would a business ever be able to identify an individual employee through what Wellgood provides them.
So now let's talk a bit about the difficulties of machine learning right now, because I know that there are a lot, and it's not as simple as just saying, okay, let's use some machine learning or let's use some AI and fix it, right? Or we could do that with AI. So how are you implementing machine learning, and how are you making sure that it doesn't come out with biases, which are so frequent these days, and making sure that is also trustable, or trustworthy, I should say?
So not only are we working with businesses, we've actually got a number of university studies going ahead as well. So we are clinically backed. We've got scientifically rigored thought process that's going into everything that we're doing. So we have leading psychologists throughout the UK that are supporting us with that. Not only with that, we are working with a number of leading data academics as well, to be able to provide us with the right level of rigor around our data, and how we develop that for our machine learning as well. But that's all well and good, but we are also held accountable as an organization by our participants but also we have in place, well, we're part of the, I will get up the, I forget what it's called. This is a really big area as well. But what we do is, so we're working towards a lot of, for example, like B Corp. So from a sustainability and an ethical standpoint, we know that they accredit businesses around, ethical practice and around sustainability. So we're moving towards that form of movement. We are also, we've applied to be a part of the Ethical AI Institute. And nice. We are looking for essentially to bring a call into how people can actually regulate ethics within AI. Because as we've alluded to previously, it's like you use so much data and it can be used for good, but actually the propensity to be able to, really affect the most vulnerable when they are at their most vulnerable is huge. And so this is why we've looked at gender biases, we've looked at even anything around diversity from a bias point of view, and we are hugely conscious of that with every step that we make through the Well Good program.
Yeah, and when all of these machine learning models are coming through and they're deciding things, they're giving you predictions, right? How are you making sure that those are accurate predictions?
So we've got a chief psychology officer on board, and she's a lead academic at Nottingham University. So she's even been recently published for a lead study that she did around stress, anxiety, and depression during lockdown in the UK. So that was published in the British Medical Journal only, I think, a month ago. Nice. It was a large study that she led. And so we're not only engaging with her as our chief psychology officer, but we also have a number of clinicians, so people who are actually in the field who are reviewing our signposting and what we are actually recommending in that sort of way. At no point are we in a position to say to an individual of a certain therapy that they need or of specific treatments that they may need. We would in no way recommend that, say, someone takes antidepressants or medication because you need human intervention at that point to be able to understand really if that was needed. So for us, what our job is to do is to create awareness and empathy of that individual's surroundings and then provide them the relevant resources at that right time. So, to be able to reach out to HR personnel or a friend or a family member or go to their GP or, seek a therapist. All these that we can actually look to provide recommendations within our intervention strategy.
Interesting. So you're never sending them a notification saying, hey, you should probably go see someone?
At no point will we actively look to trigger someone into thinking that they are unwell. If we've done our job right, then an employee will be able to understand that themselves and become aware because of the education journey that we've taken them through.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. And I see how that could get very muddy very quickly if you are recommending antidepressants and then all of a sudden you start getting kickbacks and then you start being incentivized to recommend more antidepressants, and there's your business model, and there's also a great way to destroy the trust, right?
Oh, definitely. And it's a reason why we're not diagnostic in that way. So we will never tell someone that we're, that they have anxiety or that they've had a rise in stress. These are areas that we will speak to the organization around. We will talk to them about the fact that there's been a rise in anxiety within the organization. But at no point will we allow an employee to be directly told by us that they are stressed and that they need time off work. So our whole entire product and our whole entire business model is about preventing them from taking time off work in the first place. So if we can keep them healthy through our messaging and how we're educating them around mental health, then we've done our job.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And that's great. Then that kind of leads into my next question. I mean, because mental health is such a financial burden on companies and on governments, right? Why do you feel it hasn't been taken so seriously? I mean, now maybe it's coming more to the forefront of conversations and it is being more recognized as an important piece of this puzzle of humanity. But what is it that you feel like, A, why it wasn't taken seriously, and B, what is changing and what still needs to change?
I think the amount of research that's gone into it over the past 5-10 years has been a lot more than maybe previously. A lot of traditional treatments around mental health have been, locked into basically a 50-year state. It's a lot of them are outdated and, may look at an example is bipolar disorder, may look at it as traditional, manic depressive, and, look to treat everyone in exactly the same way. I think the amount of research and data that's gone into it recently, and the fact that we've got more celebrities talking about their mental health. We've got a lot of the social media companies, a lot of the big giants. They're talking about the impact that they potentially could have on the health of individuals. And then we've got big consultancies like Deloitte, where they're reporting on an annual basis of the cost of mental health to an economy. It's not data that you really have to look for anymore. There's no, the fact that, for example, 2020 in the UK, the suicide rate is at its highest for 20 years. That's data that you can find very quickly. And so I think just the amount of awareness that is around there, it's been growing and growing for the past 5-10 years, and especially with myself. And then now we're starting to see real action coming into play, because it's not just us talking about feelings, it's us understanding, well, if this employee, as an example, if this person was to leave the organization, how much would it cost the business? What would the impact be to the organization from a financial point of view? They'd have to recruit someone to be able to come in. Okay, how long does it take to be able to recruit someone so that deficit of work won't be produced? How much do they have to pay a recruitment company to be able to recruit that individual? And how long is that onboarding process as well to be able to bring them into the organization correctly? And so the amount of money it costs to be able to replace an individual who leaves an organization due to stress, as an example, is huge. And as talent is hard to find, and I mean good talent is hard to find, I think organizations are now starting to wake up to the fact that if we treat our staff well and we have a vibrant culture, then actually we're going to perform better.
Yeah, completely. And that is something that you see, it feels like it's obvious, right? But for so many companies, it's not. And especially, well, maybe I'm a little jaded because I have been living in Spain for the last 10 years. And there, it really felt like they were behind on this. And in all of the companies that I would go into and I would talk to, and especially as I was teaching mindfulness to different companies, and so many companies looked at me like, why would we need that? What like, who cares about that kind of stuff? And it was the forward thinking companies in Spain that would realize, hey, that exact thing. If we treat our employees in a good way, then we will not be losing money having to rehire or onboard someone, or just lose out because people are burnt out. And the rehiring process actually is quite difficult in Spain. So most people just take time off, and then that company is left there having to have the other workers do that work, like we mentioned before. So there's so many great points here. I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit, but I would love to hear like your long-term plan for Well Good. Where do you want to see it? How do you want to see it grow? And what do you feel is coming?
So I think, our ambition is to create healthy cultures and vibrant cultures, within organizations. But we would love to, crack the consumer market as well, not just the business market. I think right now for us, where we are from a tech point of view, and where cultures are around understanding of mental health, is we still haven't hit the majority of businesses that actually take mental health seriously. It's often deemed as tick box exercise, where an EAP system or an employee assistant program is often deemed as what needs to be put in place, but it's completely reactive. If you're expecting employees to be able to come forward and say that they're not unwell, it just doesn't work. So for us right now, it's about really cracking the workplace, and allowing these laggards, and the majority for that matter, to be able to come to their senses. And so the way that we're doing that is really by trying to be best friends with an FD, instead of shying away from them. We're not talking about just doing a mental health awareness workshop. They have great impact around awareness, but actually what we're doing is we are really trying to align with the capitalist factor of business as much as possible, and put a pound sign or a dollar sign to everything that we're doing. And by us doing that, then we can make a huge amount of impact to, a whole wealth of individuals around the world.
I love that you want to take it to the masses, and let's geek out a little bit on this product, how it would be when it does, because I think that there is so much potential. I mean, but with the company, you have the data from the company. What would it be if it's for the masses? Are there different personas that you're looking at, or is there different areas?
I think as the product would evolve, it would be completely different. What we do with businesses is there is data that we can access, through the business's consent.
Yeah.
And we would have to do that with an individual, when we were to roll out to the masses. So there's a whole host of data that people do give up quite freely on a regular basis. And you do that if you want, for example, if you want to access finance, you'll happily give out information about your credit, you'll happily give out information about your health, and very similarly, that's something that we could look to tap into. We could look to understand financial records. We could look to understand social records. We could really immerse ourselves into the lives of individuals, and only actually need to communicate with them if there is needed an intervention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds nice. So we're getting to the end of our chat, but I have just like one, it's not so much a question because I can't figure out how to formulate this question, but it's more of a story, and it's kind of paints the picture of where I feel like a lot of people are at right now in 2020. And I was sitting in on an interview, and the guy who was getting interviewed, it came to the end, and it was like, "Do you have any questions for me?" And the guy asked the interviewer, so, like, I'm a big proponent of mental health. I did, he was like an advocate at his last company. It was a big company. Now he was interviewing for a startup. And he said, how does this startup take mental health? How do they look at that? And basically, the interviewer was like, if that's what you're looking for, this is not the place for you. And this is what we're doing. We're working our asses off because we're trying to get this product launched and we're trying to, make billions, whatever. It wasn't exactly that. It was paraphrasing, but that was the sentiment of it. And so my whole thing there is this guy who's trying to get this job, right? And in a very difficult job market as it is in 2020, because he's not the only one that has potentially been laid off. Now he has this choice, right? Like, he can stand with his morals and maybe not get a job for a longer amount of time. And he'll have to look. And then maybe he does get a job and it's great and kumbaya, happily ever after. Or he can say, you know what? All right, let's go with this startup. They don't really take mental health seriously, but I have a job and then I can feed my family. So that kind of predicament is the story that I'm trying to convey. And I don't know if you have any wisdom around that.
I think it's more a look at leadership and their mentality around it. So for a start, your friend who went to that business, I can guarantee that if he was to join that business, he'd leave very quickly, because the culture and the focus of that organization is completely against everything that he believes in. And actually, the business itself would probably suffer as well. So spoke about B Corp, so the B Corporation movement earlier on, and it was reported that B Corps actually grow about 28 times faster than, this in the UK. So B Corps grow 28 times faster than UK GDP. So if you look after your staff, if you have a sustainable business, then your business will be more successful. It will grow. And this is fact. And so, yes, you can burn and burn and burn, but actually, when you start talking about sustainability, I don't mean just looking at light bulbs and, driving
Hot
electric
showers.
cars. Yeah, exactly. It's not looking at that. It's actually the real culture of your organization. If you start looking into that, then and looking after your staff, if they fall in love with your business, if they become real ambassadors for your organization, then they will go the whole world and over for your organization. They will drive and drive and drive, and you'll have to be the person to be able to put on the brakes for them. As opposed to, this is what we expect. We expect you to run at 18-hour days. We expect you to sleep under your desk. And we've all been there. It's, no one wants to be in it. Everyone used to think it was a rite of passage that, for you to be successful, you need to be in that space. You need to go through all that pain. But surely we can learn from that.
Yeah. Incredible. I love it. I love the insight. And it is very true. It's very much what I was thinking along the lines of, he may join for the short term, looking very short term and saying, well, I got to get something. There is this, it doesn't really align with my morals or my ethos, but it is money. It is a job. So maybe using that in a way that is a stepping stone, but still, like you said, it's not going to last and it's not going to be sustainable. And if you do it in the right way, then the employees will be bending over backwards for you.
Exactly.
And I like that you're going to have to be the one that is putting on the brakes, right? You're going to have to tell them, hey, chill, take a few days off. It's not necessary to kill ourselves on this because it's no longer needed. We don't need to sleep under the desks. So I've got one last question for you, Dan, and I really appreciate you being here, talking with me, and walking me through all of this. As I told you, it's something that is close to my heart, and so I appreciate the work that you're doing and how you're going about it in
Hmm.
such an ethical mindset, right? Like you're very clear on how you're looking at this as an important problem, but also you recognize the dangers and you recognize how this can be used for bad.
Yeah.
So the last question is: are you a robot?
I may sound it at times, but definitely not.
Excellent. I want to thank you again. And for all those that are still tuning in, listening, we have a Slack community that I mentioned before. Jump in it. This is where all of these conversations are continuing. So you can find the links and everything you need to know about the Slack community down below in the description. Take care, everyone.